Welcome back to the Lars Larson Show. As I go to our friend Frank Gaffney at the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., I want to let you know that about 20 to 25 minutes ago, a report of 2 students shot at a high school in Pierce County, which is near Tacoma, Washington. We'll bring you details as they're available. At this point, police are not saying whether or not the 2 who were shot have survived or the other circumstances. We'll get you the details as they become available. Frank, thanks a lot for taking the time. We appreciate you coming on. Tell me about how important it was that the Supreme Court backed up Donald Trump's travel ban this week.
I think it was really important, Lars, not because it's the final word on all of this or because there won't be a lot more thrashing around, particularly in the lower courts, but I think what was particularly important was that 7 out of the 9 justices supported the president in implementing the basic idea that he has the statutory and constitutional authority to determine who is admitted to this country and who is kept out. And I think, that's really what this has been all about from the beginning. And I think we've talked about this before, and as I'm sure you and your listeners know, we've actually had a situation where people in these lower courts have intimated that, they would have acknowledged that authority if it were anybody other than Donald Trump who were president.
Yeah.
But as long as it's Donald Trump, they've got a special set of rules. Well, that's not how it works, and it sounds like that's where the court's going to come down. And if so, I think despite the fact there will be more thrashing, as I say, it's going to come out okay, and that's important for not just the president. I think of it as also for the presidency and for the country as well.
It's funny, Frank, that you watch the security end of it, I watch the media end of it. I think if this had been any other president and they had so many people declare, well, we know this is unconstitutional, what he's doing, and see, the courts are ruling on our side. If later the Supreme Court ruled on it, and as you said at least 7-2, no, it is within the president's authority, the mainstream media would have been going back to those same politicians who had declared so confidently that no president had this authority. And they would have been saying to them, so what do you say now that the Supreme Court says he does? But the American public is not seeing that kind of message. And I think they're missing out by not seeing that message because, it means that the president's political opponents can stake out territory and say he's not allowed to do that. And then when they're corrected by the courts, they don't have to take account of it.
Yeah, it's one of many examples that you can think of, Lars, of I guess hypocrisy is one way of calling it, double standard is another. But either way, it deserves the public, and I think it's corrosive to the whole idea of the rule of law and the fundamentals of our constitutional republic. So, in this case, I'd say at least 2. Cheers for the Supreme Court, and let's hope they'll see this thing through to completion in the near future.
By the way, Frank, tonight I started out by telling my audience that I have a dog in the fight. I'm a Protestant Christian, I'm not Jewish, but I thoroughly agree that if tomorrow Donald Trump comes out and announces that the United States is going to recognize Jerusalem as the proper capital of Israel, that it's long past time that we've done that, and that I'm glad to see him do it. But we keep hearing these threats that if the United States recognizes Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, that it's going to be not only the end of any kind of peace process, but that it'll actually cause trouble somewhere. How should we take that threat?
Well, this is what Sharia supremacists do, Lars, as we've talked about it many times. I believe that's the best way to think about what we're up against, not just in the Palestinian community over there, but elsewhere as well. People who adhere to this idea that, they are God-directed to impose this brutally repressive totalitarian doctrine of Sharia, some think of as kind of the DNA of Islam, on the entire world. And anybody who stands up to them, anybody who in any way, shape, or form disagrees with their agenda they will threaten with force, and in some cases they will use it. I've long believed that what we should do is of course not just recognize the reality that Jerusalem is, of course, the capital of the state of Israel, but we ought to just tell the consulate, the American consulate that has operated for many, many decades in West Jerusalem, to change plaque on the outside of the embassy, of the consulate, and just say it's now the embassy and be done with it. You know, you'll need a new building over time and all the rest of it, but just steal a march on these guys, and before there's violence, establish a new reality. And I think that while they're at it, by the way, I think the president ought to shut down the PLO mission in Washington, which is, a further legitimation of this thing, this operation, these Sharia supremacists, these enemies of Israel, enemies of America, for that matter. And so it would be a nice twofer. If they're going to walk away from the peace process, let's make the most of it.
I would agree with you. And by the way, Frank, I was trying to find a piece that had been written by Caroline Glick before, and I don't know how you view her. I think she's an interesting.
The best there is.
I think so too. But she had written a piece earlier this year about this subject, about, the idea of moving, putting the U.S. Embassy on the piece of land that we have owned there for more than 20 years, and say we're officially staking out our position and showing that we support our friend. And she'd written a long piece about this, about how, there are always threats made that if Israel does this or if the U.S. does that the following things will happen. And she gave a couple of great examples. I think one of them involved the Golan Heights, where the leadership of Israel just said, yeah, make all the threats you want. We're doing it anyway. And that when you actually call their bluff, that in many cases, the Muslims who have been threatening to do this or do that, if you cross one line or another, they actually back down if you call their bluff. And she gave a couple of good examples where that had happened. I just don't have. Yeah. I couldn't find the essay.
Well, she's one of our fellows, and I think the world of her. So it's well worth digging it up, and posting it if you can. But two things. One is, as you know, this is an endless problem. It isn't going to go away. But by and large, the Palestinians and other Arabs respect strength. Nothing invites more violence against you than the impression that you might be dissuaded from doing something they don't want you to do by the threat of violence. So don't allow that to take hold. And I think, secondly, this is the right thing to do. It is right to recognize Israel's capital where it is. It is right that we have our representation, our mission in Israel's capital city. And so I think it will strengthen our friends and it will punish our enemies. And that's the best strategy for, I think, international diplomacy there.
I couldn't agree with you more. Frank Gaffney is the founder and president of the Center for Security Policy. Frank, thank you so much for the time.